The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm glow over East Side Plaza. A diverse mix of families, couples, and friends thronged the mall's vibrant corridors, laughter and chatter filling the air like a joyous melody. For Maggie Johnson, the mall was more than just a shopping destination. It was a microcosm of the community she had helped shape over the decades. Today, she was excited to visit a few of her favorite shops, hoping to find a birthday gift for her grandson. Maggie adjusted her colorful floral dress, feeling the soft fabric brush against her skin. She loved the way the colors mirrored her personality, bold, bright, and unyielding. As she walked, she greeted familiar faces, her warm brown eyes twinkling with kindness. A couple of young children waved at her, recognizing the grandmotherly figure who always had a smile and a cookie to share. "Miss Maggie, are you baking cookies today?" One of the kids called out, his face smeared with chocolate. "Only if you promise to help me eat them," she replied with a chuckle, her heart swelling at the innocence of youth. The mall was always a flurry of activity, but today felt particularly alive. As Maggie meandered through the shops, she stopped to admire a display of handmade jewelry. The intricate designs caught her eye, reminding her of the artistry she had witnessed in her community over the years. She picked up a delicate silver bracelet, its shimmering surface reflecting her own silver hair. "Can I help you with anything, ma'am?" a young woman behind the counter asked, her voice bright and welcoming. Maggie smiled, setting the bracelet down. "Just browsing, dear." "It's beautiful, isn't it?" "It is. We have a sale on those today," the woman replied, her enthusiasm contagious. Maggie nodded, contemplating whether her grandson would appreciate such a gift. But as she turned to leave, she felt a familiar pang of nostalgia. Every step she took echoed memories of her life, her struggles, her triumphs, and the relentless fight for justice she had witnessed and participated in during the civil rights movement. It was a history she carried with pride. She continued strolling through the mall, pausing occasionally to watch families share meals in the food court or to observe teenagers laughing together as they snapped selfies. The sense of community wrapped around her like a warm blanket. But beneath the surface of this lively atmosphere, Maggie sensed an undercurrent of tension and unease that had been building within her community. As she passed a clothing store, she heard a commotion coming from the food court. Curious, she made her way toward the source of the noise. When she arrived, she saw a group of teenagers gathered, their phones raised, recording something. Her heart sank as she pushed through the crowd, her frail frame weaving between the curious onlookers. In the center of the food court stood Officer Rick Thompson, his police uniform stark against the vibrant colors of the mall. He towered over a small, trembling figure, an older black man who appeared to be pleading with him. Maggie's chest tightened as she recognized the man. He was a local vendor, known for his homemade sandwiches and friendly demeanor. "Just leave me alone, officer." "I didn't do anything," the vendor protested, his voice shaking. "Stop resisting, or I'll have to take you in," Officer Thompson barked, his tone harsh and unyielding. Maggie's breath caught in her throat as she took in the scene. She had seen this play out too many times before: the intimidation, the aggression, the blatant disregard for humanity. It was a sight that fueled her dedication to fighting for justice, but today, she felt a deep unease. "Officer, please," Maggie said, stepping forward despite her frailty. "He's just trying to serve his customers." "There's no need for this." Thompson's icy gaze turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "Back off, lady. This doesn't concern you," he snapped. The vendor looked at Maggie, gratitude and fear mingling in his eyes. "Thank you, Miss Maggie," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing murmurs of the crowd. Maggie's heart raced. She could feel the weight of the eyes around her, some filled with admiration for her courage, others reflecting indifference or even hostility. But she couldn't stand by and let this happen. She had fought too hard for too long to remain silent now. "Officer, we're in a public space," she insisted, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "You're supposed to protect us, not intimidate us." With that, something shifted in the crowd. A few people began to voice their agreement, murmuring support for Maggie's stance. But just as quickly, Thompson's patience wore thin. "Enough." He shouted, and in a swift, brutal motion, he lunged toward the vendor, shoving him back. The man stumbled, accidentally spilling his drink across the floor. Maggie gasped, instinctively reaching out to the vendor. But before she could react, Thompson turned toward her, his face twisted with rage. "I told you to back off." In an instant, he swung his fist, connecting with Maggie's face. Pain exploded in her vision as she fell to the ground, the world around her spinning. Gasps echoed in the air, and the crowd fell silent, stunned by the sudden violence. Maggie lay there, blood trickling from her lip, her warm brown eyes now wide with shock. She never imagined that her simple act of courage would lead to such brutality. As the world blurred around her, she heard the distant sound of her son Derek's name echoing in her mind, a name filled with love, fear, and the promise of protection. And then darkness began to creep in, but not before she felt a flicker of hope. Derek would come. He always did. As the scene shifted, so did the atmosphere in East Side Plaza. The laughter and chatter faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. It was a moment that would change everything, igniting a fire within the community that would demand justice and accountability. And it was only just the beginning. The sudden punch reverberated through East Side Plaza, a brutal punctuation mark on a seemingly ordinary day. As Maggie lay sprawled on the cold floor of the food court, the chaos around her began to unfurl like a dark cloud, enveloping the once vibrant atmosphere. Shock held the crowd in a suffocating grip, their eyes wide and mouths agape. The few who dared to move were paralyzed by fear, unsure of whether to intervene or retreat. Maggie's warm brown eyes, usually filled with kindness, were now clouded with confusion and pain. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth, mingling with the familiar pang of injustice she had fought against her entire life. She tried to lift her hand to her face, but her body felt heavy, as if the weight of the world had settled upon her frail frame. Someone called 911. A voice finally broke through the stunned silence, cutting through the tension like a knife. It was a young woman, her hands trembling as she fumbled with her phone. The sound of her urgency seemed to shake the crowd from its stupor, prompting others to pull out their devices, capturing the moment that would soon be shared across social media. "Get away from her," a man shouted, stepping forward, his fist clenched in anger. He was a regular at the mall, a father who often brought his children to enjoy the food court. There was a flicker of solidarity in his voice, but it was met with a mixture of murmurs and apprehension. Officer Rick Thompson stood over Maggie, his expression a blend of rage and defiance. She was interfering with an arrest. He barked, his voice laced with authority, "You all need to disperse. This is a police matter," but the crowd was no longer intimidated. The sight of an elderly woman, someone who had nurtured and cared for the community, brutally struck down, ignited a fire in the hearts of those witnessing the scene unfold. The collective anger bubbled to the surface, and the murmurs grew louder. "Leave her alone," someone else shouted, emboldened by the outpouring of support. "You can't just hit people." Maggie's vision was still blurred, but she could hear the rising voices around her, a cacophony of outrage that filled her with a mix of fear and pride. She had always believed in the power of community, and even in her vulnerable state, she felt a flicker of hope. They were beginning to stand up. Just then, she heard a familiar voice slice through the crowd. "Mom, where are you?" It was Derek, his voice a lifeline pulling her back from the brink of despair. Panic surged through her as she tried to call out to him, but her throat felt tight, constricted by the fear of what he might see. She didn't want him to witness her humiliation, the sight of his mother lying on the ground, bloodied and battered. But it was too late. Derek was already rushing toward her. Derek Johnson burst through the throng of people, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been at the community meeting just a few blocks away when he received a frantic call from a neighbor. The words Maggie and police replayed in his mind like a haunting echo, sending shivers down his spine as he navigated through the crowd. When he finally reached the scene, his breath caught in his throat. There was his mother, a beloved figure in the community, lying on the ground, her silver hair splayed against the tile, blood trickling from her lip. A visceral rage boiled within him, igniting a primal instinct to protect her at all costs. "Mom," Derek knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch her shoulder. "Are you okay? What happened?" Maggie's eyes fluttered open, a mixture of fear and relief flooding her features as she met his gaze. "Derek, ... double quote," she whispered, her voice shaky. Before she could finish, the reality of the situation crashed down around them. Officer Thompson stood nearby, his stance rigid, arms crossed as he surveyed the scene, his expression unyielding. Derek's protective instincts ignited, and he stood up, towering over the officer, his fists clenched at his sides. "What did you do to her?" Derek demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The crowd around them shifted, a wave of tension rippling through the onlookers as they sensed the impending clash. "She was interfering with my duties," Thompson replied coolly, as if the words alone could justify his actions. "I was making an arrest." "An arrest? For what?" Derek's voice rose, incredulous. "For standing up for someone. You don't get to hit my mother because you don't like what she has to say." The officer's cold eyes glinted with a mix of annoyance and defiance. "You need to step back, sir. This is not your business." But the crowd had begun to rally behind Derek, their energy shifting from fear to solidarity. "It is our business," someone shouted, and others echoed the sentiment, their voices rising in unison. "We won't stand for this." Derek felt a surge of adrenaline as he faced Thompson, the anger boiling within him, a potent reminder of the struggles he had dedicated his life to fighting against. "You can't just hurt people because you can. This isn't right." The atmosphere thickened with tension. It felt as though the entire mall had paused, holding its breath, waiting for the next move. The bystanders were transfixed, their phones capturing every moment, every word, as the confrontation unfolded. "Maggie needs medical attention," Derek said, his voice low but firm, directed at the officer. "You need to call an ambulance." Thompson hesitated, his expression hardening. "You're obstructing an investigation. If you don't back off, I'll have to take you in, too." Derek's heart raced, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He was caught between protecting his mother and his own principles, the very values he had spent years advocating for. But there was no backing down now. He could feel the eyes of the community on him, and he would not let them down. Maggie, still on the ground, felt a swell of pride and fear wash over her as she watched her son stand up to authority. She had raised him to be brave, to fight for what was right, and now he was embodying that spirit in the most profound way. "Derek, please," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't." But it was too late. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, a foreboding reminder that the system was about to respond. As the crowd swelled around them, passion igniting like a wildfire, it became clear that this moment would mark the beginning of something bigger, a reckoning that had long been overdue. And as Derek stood there, ready to face whatever came next, he realized that the shadows in the mall were not just about fear and division. They were also about the light of a community ready to fight back. The wail of sirens grew louder, echoing through the once vibrant corridors of Eastside Plaza, now heavy with tension and fear. Derek's heart raced as he knelt beside his mother, desperately trying to assess her condition. Maggie's warm brown eyes, usually filled with warmth and kindness, were now clouded with pain and confusion. He could see the blood trickling from her lip, a vivid reminder of the violence that had erupted just moments ago. "Mom, please, stay with me," Derek urged, his voice barely above a whisper. He gently held her hand, his thumb brushing over her frail fingers, a stark contrast to the anger boiling within him. "Help is on the way." Maggie tried to focus on her son, her heart swelling with pride despite the throbbing pain in her face. "Derek, I'm okay. Just a little shaken," she replied, her voice shaky but resolute. She had fought through worse in her life, but seeing her son so distraught filled her with a mix of fear and determination. "You don't need to." "No, Mom," Derek interrupted, his resolve hardening. "This isn't just about you. This is about what happened here today. It's about standing up for all of us. We can't let this go." As the sirens approached, the crowd began to disperse, some retreating in fear, while others lingered in solidarity, their faces etched with concern and anger. Derek felt a mix of gratitude and frustration. He appreciated their presence, but he knew that the moment had to be seized. They could not let this incident fade into the background. "Hey, is she all right?" A young man stepped forward, his brow furrowed with worry. He had been recording the confrontation on his phone, a silent witness to the chaos. "I saw everything. We need to make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug." Derek looked up, grateful for the young man's concern. "She's hurt, but she'd be okay," he replied, his voice steady with purpose. But we can't let Officer Thompson get away with this. We need to speak out to demand justice." The young man nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. "I'll share the video. Everyone needs to see what happened. This isn't right." As the paramedics arrived, the crowd began to gather again, their curiosity piqued and their anger palpable. They formed a protective circle around Derek and Maggie, some holding their phones up to record, while others shouted for accountability. The atmosphere shifted from fear to empowerment, a collective resolve igniting in the hearts of those present. Maggie felt a surge of pride as she watched her son take charge. She had raised Derek to be a fighter, to stand up against injustice, but seeing him lead the charge in such a vulnerable moment filled her with a sense of purpose. "Derek," she said softly, her voice breaking through the noise, "I'm proud of you. But please, let's handle this carefully. We don't want to escalate things further." He nodded, but the fire in his heart wouldn't be extinguished. "I can't just stand by, Mom. Not anymore. Not after this. We need to make sure everyone knows the truth." The paramedics worked quickly, assessing Maggie's injuries and preparing to transport her to the hospital. Derek stayed close, holding her hand tightly, unwilling to let go. He felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, the burden of his mother's pain, and the injustice they had just witnessed. As they lifted Maggie onto a stretcher, Derek turned back to the crowd, his voice rising above the chaos. "We can't let this be forgotten. We need to stand together to demand justice for my mother and for everyone who has faced this kind of brutality. It's time to make our voices heard." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, emboldening Derek. He felt the energy shift, the collective anger morphing into something more powerful resolve, a determination to fight back against the shadows that had lingered along in their community. As the paramedics wheeled his mother away, Derek followed closely, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. He knew that this was only the beginning. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him. This was not just about one woman suffering, it was a reflection of a much larger problem, one that had plagued their community for years. Outside the mall, the setting sun cast a golden hue across the sky, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within Derek. He pulled out his phone, dialing the number he knew by heart. "Hey, it's me," he said when someone picked up. "You won't believe what just happened at the mall. I need your help now." As he relayed the details to his friend, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would organize a protest, a peaceful demonstration to demand justice for his mother and to shine a light on the systemic racism that had festered in their community for too long. "Meet me at the park in an hour," he instructed, his voice steady. "We're going to show them that we won't be silenced." Ending the call, he turned to the gathering crowd who had followed him outside. Their faces reflected a mixture of anger and determination, and he could see the spark of solidarity igniting among them. "We're going to hold a peaceful protest," he announced, his voice ringing with conviction. "We're going to stand up for what's right, for my mother, and for everyone who has faced this." "Who's with me?" A chorus of voices erupted in agreement, the crowd swelling with energy and purpose. Derek felt a surge of hope as he realized that they were no longer just bystanders, they were a movement. As they began to gather signs and chant slogans, Derek's heart raced with anticipation. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the chance to confront the shadows that had haunted their community for too long. It was time to reclaim their voices, to demand justice, and to show the world that they would no longer remain silent. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, Derek stood tall, ready to lead his community in a fight that had been a long time coming. The battle for justice was just beginning, and he would not back down. Not now, not ever. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow across Eastside Plaza, Derek stood at the park's edge, surrounded by a gathering crowd of supporters. The air buzzed with a tense energy, a palpable mix of anger and determination. People of all ages had come together, united by a common purpose to demand justice for Maggie Johnson and to confront the systemic racism that had long plagued their community. Derek's heart raced as he scanned the crowd. He could see familiar faces mingling with those he didn't recognize, each person drawn together by the urgency of the moment. Holding a hastily made sign that read "Justice for Maggie," Derek felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about his mother anymore. It was about everyone who had suffered at the hands of injustice. Let's move toward the mall, he shouted, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. We need to make sure our voices are heard where it matters most. The crowd surged forward, and Derek felt a rush of adrenaline as they marched toward East Side Plaza. The rhythmic sound of footsteps echoed in the evening air, a heartbeat that thrummed with hope and defiance. As they approached the mall, Derek caught sight of the police cars still parked outside, their flashing lights casting a harsh glow against the softening sky. The sight sent a bolt of anger through him, igniting the fire within. Once they reached the mall entrance, Derek raised his voice again, calling for silence. The crowd quieted, their faces illuminated by the neon lights of the mall. Today, we stand together to demand justice. We will not be silenced or intimidated. What happened to my mother was wrong, and we won't let it be forgotten. A wave of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Derek felt a swell of pride. He was no longer just Maggie's son. He was a leader, a voice for the voiceless. The chants began to rise, echoing through the plaza. Justice for Maggie, no more violence. But as the chants filled the air, Derek spotted Officer Rick Thompson emerging from the mall, a steely look on his face. The burly officer approached the crowd, flanked by a couple of younger officers. Derek's heart raced, his protective instincts kicking in. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, a confrontation that could either solidify their movement or escalate the tension. Thompson stepped forward, arms crossed, a defiant stance that made Derek's blood boil. This is an unlawful gathering, he barked, his voice booming over the chants. You need to disperse immediately. There's no need for this kind of unrest. Derek took a step forward, his fists clenching at his sides. Unlawful? You think standing up for my mother is unlawful? You think demanding accountability for your actions is unrest? He felt the crowd rally behind him, their murmurs of support growing louder. Thompson's eyes narrowed, and a cold smile crept across his face. You're obstructing justice, son. If you don't disperse, I'll have to take you in. Take me in. Derek shot back, his voice rising. You think I'm afraid of you? You're the one who assaulted an elderly woman today. You're the one who's supposed to protect us, not harm us. The tension in the air thickened, and Derek could feel the crowd's energy shift. He caught glimpses of concerned faces mixed with those who were emboldened by his words. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, as if the very air around them was charged with electricity. Look around you, officer, Derek continued, gesturing to the crowd. These people are here because they care. They're here because they're tired of the injustice in this community. You can't just bully us into silence. Thompson took a step closer, his bulky frame towering over Derek. You think you can rally these people against law enforcement? You think you can change anything? His voice dripped with condescension, and Derek felt his anger boil over. I'm not trying to change anything, Derek replied, his voice steady but filled with passion. I'm trying to make sure nothing changes because nothing should. We shouldn't have to live in fear of the people who are supposed to protect us. The crowd erupted in cheers, their chants growing louder, drowning out Thompson's attempts to regain control. Justice for Maggie, no more violence, they shouted, their voices rising in unison. Thompson's expression hardened, and he looked back at the other officers, who exchanged uncertain glances. Derek could sense the shift in the atmosphere, the balance of power teetering precariously. In that moment, he realized he wasn't just standing up for his mother. He was standing up for an entire community that had been silenced for too long. Listen, everyone, Derek shouted, raising his voice above the din. We're not here to incite violence or chaos. We're here to demand justice, to demand accountability. This isn't just about me or my mother, it's about everyone who has faced injustice. We are tired of being pushed around. Thompson stepped forward again, this time with a more aggressive stance. You're crossing a line, son. I suggest you back down before this gets out of hand. Derek felt the heat of Thompson's words wash over him, but he refused to back down. I won't back down. Not now. Not ever. If you think you can intimidate us into silence, you're wrong. We're not afraid of you. As the crowd erupted into cheers once more, Derek felt a surge of power coursing through him. The officer's threats no longer held the same weight. The people surrounding him were united, and together they were a force to be reckoned with. Suddenly, a voice cut through the clamor. A young woman stepped forward, her sign held high. "We're not just speaking for Maggie, we're speaking for all the victims of police brutality. We're demanding justice for everyone." The crowd roared in agreement, their voices swelling like a tidal wave. Derek felt a rush of adrenaline as he realized the moment had arrived. This was no longer just a protest. It was a movement, a collective roar of defiance that echoed through the plaza. Thompson's expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "I won't warn you again," he said, though there was less conviction in his voice now. "Disperse, or I will take action, take action." Derek challenged, stepping closer to the officer. "What action? More violence, more intimidation?" "We're not afraid of you, and we won't be silenced." The tension hung thick in the air, and for a moment, it felt as if the world had paused, holding its breath in anticipation of what would come next. Derek could see the resolve in the eyes of those around him, the fire igniting a spark of hope that had been absent for far too long. And as the crowd rallied behind him, Derek knew they were on the brink of something monumental, a moment that would resonate beyond this day, a movement that would demand change. It was time to confront the shadows that had lingered in the community for far too long. Together, we will not be silenced. He shouted, and the crowd echoed his words, their voices rising in a powerful chorus that filled the plaza. We will stand for justice, and in that moment, Derek felt a surge of hope, knowing they were ready to face whatever came next. The confrontation had begun, and they would not back down. Not now, not ever. The chance of justice for Maggie echoed through the night, reverberating against the walls of East Side Plaza and spilling out into the streets beyond. Derek stood at the forefront of the crowd, his heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and determination. The fiery spirit of the gathering propelled him forward, igniting a sense of purpose that he had never felt so intensely before. This was no longer just about his mother, it was a rallying call for everyone who had ever felt the weight of injustice. As the chants grew louder, Derek glanced around, taking in the faces of those who had come to support them. The crowd had swelled beyond his expectations, with families, friends, and even strangers who had been moved by the events of the day. He spotted familiar faces among the thronged neighbors who had known Maggie for years, young activists he had worked with in the community, and even some older folks who had witnessed the same struggles decades ago. Their presence filled him with hope. "Derek." A voice broke through the din, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see Carla, a spirited young woman he had met during community meetings, pushing her way through the crowd. Her face glowed with enthusiasm and her eyes sparkled with determination. "We need to get this on social media. Everyone has to know what's happening here." Derek nodded, grateful for her energy. "Absolutely. Let's get people sharing their stories. We need to show that this isn't just one incident. It's a pattern of behavior. It's time to expose the truth." Carla pulled out her phone, quickly tapping on the screen. "I'll start a live stream. Let's get the world watching." She turned the camera toward Derek, her voice ringing out with confidence. "This is Derek Johnson, and tonight we're standing together to demand justice for his mother, Maggie Johnson, and for everyone who has faced police brutality." Derek felt a rush of gratitude as he took center stage in front of the camera. "Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. We're not just fighting for my mother, we're fighting for justice, for accountability, for every person who has suffered at the hands of those sworn to protect us. This is our moment to make a difference." The crowd erupted into cheers, a cacophony of voices that swelled with unity. Derek could see people recording the scene, their phones raised high, capturing the energy and spirit of the moment. He knew this would spread like wildfire, reaching those who couldn't be there in person, but who would feel the weight of their message. As the live stream continued, Derek felt a sense of urgency surging through him. "We need to organize a larger protest," he announced, glancing at the crowd. "One that will demand accountability not just for my mother, but for everyone who has faced injustice in our community. We need to make sure our voices are heard." A roar of agreement surged through the crowd, and Derek's heart raced with the possibilities ahead. "Let's turn this into a movement. I want everyone to share their stories." If you've been affected by police violence or racial profiling, we want to hear from you. Let's amplify our voices together. He watched as people began to step forward, sharing their experiences of injustice, their voices rising as they spoke of fear, pain, and resilience. Each story added to the tapestry of the movement, weaving together a powerful narrative that could not be ignored. A young woman with braided hair stepped forward, her expression fierce and resolute. "I was stopped and searched last year for no reason at all. I felt so humiliated and I was terrified. We need to stop this." The crowd erupted in support, chanting her words as if they were a battle cry. No more violence, no more fear. Derek felt a surge of pride swell within him. This was what he had hoped for, a community coming together, ready to fight back against the shadows that had haunted them for too long. As more people shared their stories, the atmosphere shifted, transforming from a moment of anger into a collective movement for change. In the midst of the powerful gathering, Derek's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from his friend Marcus, who had been working on community outreach for years. "I'm on my way. I heard what happened. We're ready to help organize." Derek's heart leaped at the thought of having Marcus by his side. He knew that with Marcus's experience and connections, they could reach even more people. "We're going to change things," Derek whispered to himself, the conviction in his voice echoing in the air around him. Suddenly, Carla's voice broke through the crowd once more. "We need to make sure the media knows about this. Let's contact local news stations. They need to see the people standing together for justice." Derek nodded, feeling the fire of motivation building within him. "Let's do it. We can write a press release and get it sent out tonight. We need to make sure everyone knows what happened to Mom and how the community is responding." As the chants continued, Derek felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He was no longer just a son fighting for his mother. He was a leader, ready to guide his community toward change. The voices around him were a powerful reminder that they were not alone in this fight. As the night deepened, the crowd began to gather around Derek, forming a circle of solidarity. They shared their hopes, their fears, and their determination to make a difference. Conversations flowed, plans were made, and a sense of purpose ignited in the hearts of those present. Just then, the sound of sirens pierced the night air once more, and Derek's stomach tightened. He turned to see police cars pulling up to the perimeter of the park, lights flashing ominously. "Stay calm, everyone," he instructed, his voice steady. "We won't let fear dictate our actions. We're here for a reasoned justice." The crowd responded with a unified roar, their voices rising above the noise of the sirens. "Justice for Maggie, no more violence." Derek could see Officer Thompson among the officers stepping out of the cars, his expression grim and defiant. The tension in the air thickened, but Derek refused to back down. This was their moment, and they would not be intimidated. "Remember why we're here," he shouted, looking into the faces of those around him. "We're standing up for our rights, for our community, and for everyone who has faced injustice. We will not be silenced." As the police approached, the crowd held their ground, the energy crackling in the atmosphere like electricity. Derek stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. They had ignited a movement, and he knew it was only the beginning. "Together, we will show them that we are not afraid," he declared, and the crowd erupted into applause and cheers, their voices echoing into the night. They were ready to confront the shadows that lingered over their lives, united in their fight for justice. As the police advanced, Derek felt a surge of resolve coursing through him. This was their moment to shine a light on the darkness, and he would not let it slip away. The battle was just beginning, and they would stand together, unyielding and unafraid. The night air crackled with energy as the crowd stood resolute, their chants echoing through the park and spilling out into the streets. Derek felt the heat of the moment coursing through him, a blend of adrenaline and determination that propelled him forward. The police presence loomed nearby, but the fear that had once threatened to grip him now transformed into a fierce resolve. They were ready to demand justice not just for his mother, Maggie, but for an entire community that had endured too much silence. "Stay strong," Derek shouted, his voice cutting through the tension as he faced the crowd. "Tonight, we're not just fighting for my mom. We're fighting for every person who has faced injustice in this community, we're here to reclaim our voices. The crowd erupted in a chorus of agreement, their faces lit by the glow of the police lights. Justice for Maggie. No more violence, they shouted, their voices rising like a battle cry against the night. Derek scanned the faces before him, familiar neighbors and new friends, all united by a common goal. He felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. This wasn't just about one incident. It was a movement, a collective awakening to the reality of racial injustice that had been festering in their community for far too long. Let's get organized, Carla called out, breaking through the chants. We need to make sure everyone knows what happened today. We have to contact the news, get our voices heard. Derek nodded, his mind racing with ideas. Let's create a press release and share it on social media. We need to document everything what happened to my mom, the violence, and our demands for justice. We'll create a hashtag to spread awareness. This is our chance to make an impact. As Derek spoke, he noticed the crowd's energy shift. People were pulling out their phones, eager to participate, to share their stories. He felt a renewed sense of hope as he watched them spring into action, capturing the moment, the unity, and the determination that filled the air. Who has experience writing press releases? Derek asked, scanning the crowd. A few hands shot up, and he gestured toward a young woman with bright red hair. Great. Can you and Carla work on that? Meanwhile, I'll coordinate with those who want to share their stories. The young woman nodded, her expression serious but determined. We'll make sure to highlight the systemic issues at play. This isn't just about one officer. It's about the culture of policing in our community. As they began to organize, Derek moved through the crowd, listening to stories and gathering testimonies. Each shared experience added another layer to their movement, creating a tapestry of voices that could no longer be ignored. I was stopped for no reason last year, one man explained, his voice trembling with the weight of his memories. I felt so powerless, but tonight, I feel like we can change things. Derek nodded, sharing in his anger and frustration. Tonight is about reclaiming our power. We won't let fear dictate our lives any longer. Every story matters, and together, we can demand change. The group continued to grow, and Derek felt the energy shifting from fear to empowerment. He noticed the police officers watching from a distance, their expressions inscrutable. The sight ignited a fire within him, a reminder of the stakes at hand. They were not just standing up for themselves. They were standing up for a future where people could walk freely without fear of violence or discrimination. As the press release started to take shape, Derek stepped back to the center of the crowd, his heart pounding with purpose. Everyone, listen up, he called out, raising his voice above the murmurs. We're going to organize a larger protest next week. I want everyone to bring their friends, their family. Let's make this the biggest demonstration our community has ever seen. We need to show them that we're united, that we won't be silenced. Cheers erupted from the crowd, and Derek felt a rush of adrenaline. We'll gather at the mall, where it all began. We'll march, we'll chant, and we'll demand justice. This is our moment to show that we're serious about change. Carla stepped forward, her phone still in hand. I've started a live stream. Let's make sure the world sees our determination. This is just the beginning. Derek nodded, his heart swelling with pride as he watched the crowd rally together. They were creating a movement, one that would resonate far beyond the walls of Eastside Plaza. We're going to reach out to other organizations, too, he added, feeling the weight of their collective purpose. Let's connect with groups that have been fighting for justice and let them know we're standing with them. This is bigger than just us. As they continued to strategize, the police presence remained, but Derek felt a shift in the air. The officers appeared less certain, unsure of how to respond to the growing movement before them. It was a small victory, but one that filled Derek with hope. Let's take a moment to remember why we're here, Derek called out, raising his voice over the noise. We're not just standing against one officer's actions. We're standing against a system that allows this kind of violence to happen. We're here for Maggie, for every victim of police brutality, and for every person who has ever felt marginalized or oppressed. The crowd fell silent, their eyes focused on him. Derek took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Together, we are stronger. Together, we will be heard. As the crowd erupted back into cheers, Derek knew they were on the cusp of something monumental. He felt the energy shift, a collective resolve igniting within them. They were no longer just individuals. They were a united front, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With the press release nearly complete and plans for the upcoming protests solidifying, Derek felt a sense of urgency. They had to keep the momentum going to ensure that the world knew what had happened at Eastside Plaza. "Let's keep sharing our stories," he urged. "Let's make sure everyone understands what we're fighting for." As the night wore on, the energy in the park remained electric. The crowd continued to grow, drawn together by a shared purpose and a desire for change. Derek felt a sense of hope blossoming within him, a realization that they were not just fighting for justice. They were fighting for a future where love and respect would triumph over fear and division. And as they prepared for the challenges ahead, Derek knew that they would not back down. The shadows in the mall had ignited a fire in their hearts, and together, they would rise to face it, united in their call for justice and change. The night was just beginning, and their voices would echo long after the last chant faded into the darkness. The fight for justice had only just begun. The morning sun bathed Eastside Plaza in a warm glow, but the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Derek stood at the forefront of a sea of faces, all filled with determination and hope. The crowd had gathered for the protest he had called, a moment that felt monumental, not just for him, but for the entire community that had rallied behind his mother, Maggie Johnson. As he looked out over the throng of supporters, he felt a mix of pride and gratitude. People of all ages and backgrounds had come together, united by a shared purpose. Banners and signs filled the air, each one echoing the message they had fought so hard to amplify: justice for Maggie. And no more violence. Derek took a deep breath, his heart racing with the weight of what was to come. This was the culmination of their efforts over the past week, the countless stories shared, the late nights spent organizing, and the determination to shine a light on the injustices that had long plagued their community. He could see his mother at the edge of the crowd, her silver hair glinting in the sunlight, her presence a powerful reminder of why they were all here. "Today, we stand together, not just for my mother, but for everyone who has faced injustice," Derek called out, his voice ringing with conviction. The crowd erupted in cheers, their energy surging through the air like electricity. "We're here to demand accountability, to demand change, and to show that we will not be silenced." As Derek spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was their moment, one that could reverberate far beyond the walls of Eastside Plaza. He had spent the last few days working tirelessly with local activists and community leaders to organize this protest, and the overwhelming turnout was a testament to the strength of their collective voice. The police presence was noticeably heavier today, but Derek refused to let fear dictate their actions. He had seen the way Officer Thompson had reacted during the initial confrontation, and he knew they had to remain peaceful. "Remember, everyone," he urged, "we're here to stand up for what's right. Let's keep this peaceful, no matter what happens." The crowd nodded in agreement, their faces focused and determined. As they began to march toward the entrance of the mall, Derek felt a rush of hope swell within him. This wasn't just about his mother's struggle. It was about creating a future where everyone could feel safe and respected, regardless of their race. As they approached the mall, Derek spotted a group of local news reporters setting up cameras, eager to capture the moment. He felt a surge of adrenaline as he realized the significance of their presence. This was their chance to reach a wider audience, to spread their message even further. "Let's make sure the media knows why we're here," he shouted, rallying the crowd. "Let's make our voices heard." The chants grew louder as they marched, their energy resonating in the air. The crowd moved as one, a powerful wave of determination that swept through the plaza. Derek felt a sense of unity and purpose wash over him. It was a feeling he had longed for in his fight for justice. Once they reached the designated area outside the mall, Derek took a moment to gather his thoughts. He scanned the crowd, taking in the faces of those who had shown up to support him, his mother, and the cause. He could see the passion in their eyes, the unwavering commitment to change. Just then, Derek spotted Officer Thompson, flanked by several officers, standing at the edge of the crowd. The tension in the air was palpable, but Derek refused to be intimidated. This was their moment, and they wouldn't back down. "Everyone, listen up," Derek called out, raising his voice above the chants. "We're going to hold a moment of silence for all those who have suffered at the hands of injustice. Let's honor their voices and remember why we're fighting today." As the crowd fell silent, Derek felt a profound sense of connection to those who had come before him, those who had fought for civil rights, those who had endured pain and suffering, and those who had paved the way for this moment. He closed his eyes, envisioning a future free from fear and violence. After a moment, he opened his eyes and spoke again. "Now, let's make our demands clear," he shouted, his voice ringing with conviction. "We demand accountability for Officer Thompson and all those who abuse their power. We demand an end to racial profiling and police brutality, and we demand justice for my mother." The crowd erupted into cheers once more, their voices echoing through the plaza. Derek felt a rush of determination wash over him. This was their moment to shine a light on the darkness that had lingered for too long. As the protest continued, Derek noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The police officers, initially appearing rigid and defensive, began to relax as they observed the peaceful nature of the gathering. Officer Thompson's expression was still stern, but the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease slightly. Perhaps they were beginning to understand the power of the community's voice. Hours passed, and the crowd grew larger, swelling with energy and purpose. News reporters interviewed participants, capturing their stories and experiences. Derek felt a sense of pride as he watched his mother speak with some of the reporters, sharing her story and the importance of standing up against injustice. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the plaza, Derek took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them here. This wasn't just a protest, it was a movement, a collective awakening to the realities of racial injustice that had plagued their community for too long. Suddenly, Derek spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Marcus, his friend and fellow activist, pushing his way through the throng. Derek's heart swelled with relief. "Marcus," he called out, waving him over. "Derek, I'm so proud of you for organizing this." Marcus exclaimed, a broad smile on his face. "This is incredible. The energy here is amazing. Thanks, man. We couldn't have done it without everyone coming together," Derek replied, his voice filled with gratitude. "This is just the beginning. We need to keep pushing for change, to hold people accountable." As night fell, the atmosphere shifted once more. The crowd's energy transformed into a sense of unity and purpose, a shared commitment to continue the fight for justice. Derek knew that their efforts would not go unnoticed. This was a moment that would reverberate throughout the community and beyond. As the protest began to wind down, Derek stepped forward once more. "Thank you all for being here today. Together, we've shown the world that we will not be silenced. We will continue to fight for justice, for accountability, and for a future where every person is treated with dignity and respect." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices rising in a powerful chorus. Derek felt a sense of hope swell within him, knowing that they had taken a significant step toward change. The shadows that had lingered over the community were beginning to lift, replaced by the light of solidarity and resilience. As the crowd began to disperse, Derek spotted Officer Thompson standing at the edge, his expression unreadable. But as their eyes met, Derek felt a flicker of understanding pass between them. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where dialogue and accountability could replace fear and violence. With his mother by his side, Derek knew that they had started something powerful. The fight for justice would continue, but they had taken a stand, and their voices would echo long after the last chant faded into the night. As the community began to disperse, Derek felt a sense of hope and determination wash over him. They had come together to confront the shadows of injustice, and together, they would continue to shine a light on the darkness that had lingered for far too long. What did you think of the story? Leave your thoughts in the comments.